Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to new week edition of Sir Han on X, coming to you live from Cincinnati, Ohio, in the United States. Happy Fight Week to all my fight followers. Of course, it is the rematch between Oleksandr Usyk and Tyson Fury at the end of the week. I will get into that later uh, when I get to the boxing segment of my show. Of course, everybody's all over the place, especially when it comes to the FaceTime that what took place between Turk Al-Sheikh, Usyk, and Fury. I'll address that later. Revisit a an infamous day and a famous day in the boxing world, and of course the upset that took place with Jaime Munguia over the weekend. I'll address all of that later. Lots of stuff to cover, but one thing on a slight personal note I have to address because I have a boatload of people who's in the prayer community that those who don't know that the cancer has run into the family, and earlier today my mom got a pre-screened for cancer and she has come up cancer free today. So I just want to get that out there. Just something I have to address before I get started my show because it's my mom and I love her to the moon and back. And every time she texts at me and says my cancer came up good, I'm cancer free, it's the biggest sigh of relief. So yeah, sorry. I just have to announce that. Start right that up before I came onto here. Hope everyone had a wonderful uh, weekend. Have a wonderful day, 16th of December, 2024. To my NFL followers, happy Victory Monday for those who celebrate. We'll be touching on the games also, only the ones with playoff implications because we're starting to round up. I think we're starting to get a feel who the teams are going to be in the AFC and NFC playoffs. Uh, more or less, now it's about seedings and clinching divisions and everything else. Now, of course, the stuff that's going on in boxing, anything else I can think of in the middle, I'll just throw it in the middle of all this. Uh, those who wonder why I sound different, I just overcame a weekend cold, which is just nasty. But I'm fine. I'm surviving. I'll be all right. So let's get right onto it here a little bit. Of course, some of the big games that took place over the weekend. Um, Kansas City inching closer to clinching the number one seed over Cleveland. Brett McDuffie finally got his first career interception. I know a lot of Chiefs fans who I follow were wanting it. You got it. Congratulations. I said all along, he's one of the premier cornerbacks in the league. He got it. Of course, the situation here is the ankle injury to Patrick Mahomes. Turns out, I guess now it's just a mild sprain as opposed to anything more than that. It's a week to week proposition. I think you guys would be fine if you set up because I think your defense and the offense is good enough to carry the team to the number one seed to hold off. Well, I think that what we'll do is force Andy Reid to utilize that really a three-headed monster. You have a running back. We can think about uh, Isaiah Pacheco, Kareem Hunt, and even some cases of Samaje Perine, and basically forces your defense to step up. Which this is sort of what they did when they won the Super Bowl in 2022. When Mahomes had the high ankle sprain in the playoff game against Jacksonville, the defense really cranked it up, especially against Cincinnati, and they went way to the Super Bowl. It's one of those. It's a dicey situation, but I think you guys will be fine. Whether you play him or not. I think anything that does happen to Mahomes, even the smallest of tweaks, sit him. You have everything pretty much clinched. So that's Kansas City holding on to the number one seed, and I think they'll eventually get it, unless they really, really, really collapse, which is not going to happen because I think they beat Houston Saturday with whoever's at quarterback. Uh, some of the other ones, of course, the Giant won. And speaking of Buffalo, the Giant won yesterday when they came out and just beat Detroit 48-42 in one of the wildest games probably ever. Both teams offenses back and forth up and down the field. Neither defense could stop either of them. Of course, the story here was that wild onside kick by Dan Campbell in the middle of the game, which I don't know what he was doing or thinking simply because they were still in the game. I think part of it is because they were able to stop Josh Allen, that Buffalo offense, who is just sizzling hot right now. I mean, they're cooking with gas, people. I mean, Josh Allen, you might as well just give him. I don't want to say you want to wrap up the MVP because I think Lamar Jackson, Saquon Barkley, among others, might have something to say about that in the end. But right now, Josh Allen has the MVP. Is Josh Allen's to lose, and at the way he's going, he's probably going to wind up getting it. Some people calling for a unanimous vote. I wouldn't go that far yet. I'd wait to see the finals of the season to uh, take a look at that because the unanimous vote gets real weird. A lot of people thought Lamar Jackson should have been unanimous last year. Uh, before that, people thought Patrick Mahomes should have been unanimous, which I agree with. I thought that should have been unanimous in 22 when he won it. But Buffalo, got the division clinched. You're trying to keep pace with Kansas for the 1 seed. Trying to at least do what they can to at least hold off everybody else for the 2 seed, which I think they're going to have that wrapped up here soon. Of course, the all Keystone State battle was Philly over Pittsburgh. Weird affair both ways. Early on the tussle, Pittsburgh's offense couldn't really get much going. Of course, there's a lot of hoopla about the hit Fitzpatrick had on Saquon Barkley. I didn't think it was a dirty hit. I don't know why people, especially in Cincinnati and Cleveland, think Minkah Fitzpatrick is a dirty player. You guys are just sad because he finds a way to make plays while your secondary players don't. But for Philly, all of a sudden, they're a player for the number 1 seed in the NFC. They're not necessarily. But the thing with Philadelphia, the reason why I pause here is this: there's always something with Nick Sirianni. There's always something with that coach. Always. I could trace back to last season when they had that huge win in Kansas City, largely because Marquez Valdez-Scantling dropped the ball because he doesn't know how to catch balls to save his life. I don't even know he knows how to grab his own balls. But after that, Nick Sirianni just acted like a little kid in a candy store. Oh, really douchebaggy. And of course, the Eagles took downhill. Early in the season, they barely squeaked by the Cleveland Browns, and then he taunts the Browns fans who were at Philadelphia for that particular game. And of course, now there was a scuffle, that verbal altercation that took place. Excuse me for this word scuffle, between him and an assistant that was caught on camera. That's why I pause when it comes to Philly, because there's always something with Nick Sirianni. And I said, even though this team is immensely talented, especially that defensive front, because Jalen Carter is a man amongst boys right now on that defensive front. I'll say that. I mean, Jalen Carter is a load. But there's always something with Philly that you think something is about to screw up, especially when we talk about their head coach, Nick Sirianni, because we've seen this act before. But, they have the talent. They're challenging Detroit for the 1 seed. I'm not going to go any more further than that because defenses are going to probably start to load the box more when they play the Eagles to try to take Saquon Barkley out because Barkley's flirting with a 2,000-yard season. It forced Jalen Hurts to beat you with the pass. At times, Hurts can be hit and miss. Now, I know they didn't have Dallas Goedert for a minute, their standout tight end, but I'm not ready to anoint them anything like some of the people are as the team to beat in the NFC. Let's wait for a minute. I know Detroit Lions are decimated on the defensive front. Their defense is absolutely a mess. You can make a starting lineup out of that injury reserve roster that Detroit has on defense. But I'm gonna pause for a minute. Let's see what happens when all the seeding plays out and how the teams play out. Because I've seen the act many times where one team gets so hot in the regular season, and on the surface it looks like they're going to roll to the Super Bowl or a championship. But then when it comes to the postseason, they crap the bed. So I'm just going to wait on that for when it comes to all of this, because a lot of people are already anointing Buffalo and Philly as the Super Bowl representatives. Let's wait a minute, because I know the team in Kansas is going to have something to say about the AFC, and 2 or 3 teams, especially Detroit, despite all their injuries, will have something to say about the NFC. So we'll wait till the official playoff picture goes on or concludes. Some other games with playoff implications. Baltimore just trashed the Giants. Lamar Jackson, stellar performance, 5 touchdown passes. Rashad Bateman is starting to become a bona fide number 2 receiver opposite Zay Flowers. Of course, they have the 2 tight ends, Likely and Andrews. But a lot of people were on Rashad Bateman's case in Baltimore for I don't know what reason. The guy was coming up not too long ago, and it takes about a year and a half for something like that to fully recover from. And it seems as how good Rashad Bateman can be when he's fully healthy. Perfect complement to Zay Flowers and what they do in the Baltimore offense. Lamar Jackson's just playing stellar ball right now. I'm not ready to. He's still going to have something to say about the MVP at the end. Although I think it will eventually go Josh Allen. But to quickly write him off right now, I think is a bit of a push. Right now, they're still competing with Pittsburgh for the AFC North title. Of course, the big tilt Saturday in Baltimore, the rematch. Hard hitting. Both teams would like to beat each other up. There's been the history between those two teams in there, which takes a style of their head coaches, Mike Tomlin of Pittsburgh, John Harbaugh of Baltimore. But a huge win. Lamar Jackson, about as flawless as you could possibly be. He had the fumble early in the game, bounced back dramatically and bigly. So Baltimore is still in the hunt for a home game in the first round because it's still challenging Pittsburgh for the division crown. They're starting to trend upward again. And I said earlier this season, the vision they had when they brought in Derrick Henry with Lamar Jackson and the weapons, they can balance it out. Question is whether that defense can start to step up, which they have. Roquan Smith starting to play some better football for that defense, and you still have the standout safety Kyle Hamilton. A lot of people are going to say they're going to plummet in the postseason per usual. Let's wait a minute for this because I think they have a chip on their shoulder after what happened against Kansas in the AFC title game. I wouldn't be surprised if they wind up going back there to Arrowhead for a second time this season. So I'm not ready to anoint anything yet. Maybe a bit of a stunner here was Tampa Bay going to LA and stunning the Chargers. Not just stunning them. I mean, they just beat them down like a drum. I mean, Baker Mayfield just got hot early, fighting Mike Evans for big plays after big plays. Game was essentially over in the first 5 minutes. The defense of the Chargers was so good early on. Teams are now starting to find cracks. I mean, Cincinnati did a couple weeks ago. Tampa Bay's doing it here. They hit another shell there. I forgot who it was. And of course, Kansas City in the first half had success when they clinched the division. For Tampa Bay, I said all along, when they got Baker Mayfield over there and the chemistry he has with his receivers and tight ends, especially Cade Otton and Mike Evans, I would say Chris Godwin also, but now, of course, Godwin out for the season. He has a chemistry that's built. When they cook, they can be as good as any offense in the entire NFC. Looks like they're going to find a way to hold off Atlanta for the NFC South title. It clinched that, which was my pick earlier in the season. A lot of guys were riding the Atlanta bandwagon because of Kirk Cousins, but Kirk Cousins has taken a nosedive. But for Tampa Bay, huge win on the road. Just solidify basically that was basically the 3 or 4 seed match situation. Because it's either going to be them or the NFC West battling for that spot because Detroit and Philly have the top 2 clinched and they're battling for the number 1 spot. But big win for Tampa. Chargers trying to mess with that 6-7 seed in the AFC playoffs for the wild card. Big tilt Thursday against the Broncos coming up. The suddenly hot Broncos, especially that defense, who's just putting clamps on some people right now. With maybe the sole exception to Cleveland because Jameis Winston just got lucky with a couple passes. But big win for Denver yesterday when they beat the Indianapolis Colts to go to 9 wins, pretty much knocking on the door to going to the playoffs themselves. Of course, a big tilt this Thursday, as I said, the Chargers and the Broncos for one of the for basically the 6th and 7th season AFC playoffs because winner's going to get the 6, loser's going to get the 7. Problem is, a 5th seed going to be probably Baltimore or Pittsburgh, but they have the head-to-head tiebreakers on both. You might as well forget that because they're not, unless Baltimore and Pittsburgh just crashes and burns, which that's not happening. Because each team has, I believe, 11 wins right now. But big tilt coming up Thursday. I will divulge into that this week. Big win for the Broncos to keep themselves in the AFC playoff hunt. Chargers, even though they lost, they're still in it. It's going to be a huge game Thursday night because a couple teams outside, mainly Indiana, Denver, and Cincinnati, are knocking on the door. Indiana, lost. Miami looks like their playoff hopes sort of dived a little bit after losing in Houston. Tua throwing 2 intentional interceptions to Derek Stingley Jr. The second one, I don't even know what he was thinking. He was basically over. Houston pretty much locked into that 4 seed after clinching the AFC South title. So basically, they're going to the playoffs. They got the division. They're fine. They're going to get a home playoff game against either Baltimore or Pittsburgh. We'll see where that goes. But they do have a big one coming up this week against Kansas, and again next week against Baltimore. We're going to get a better clue how good this team can actually be. And of course, up in the Northwest last night, the Green Bay Packers pounded the Seattle Seahawks. Game not as close as the score indicated. The story here, Jordan Love just did everything he wanted to. Green Bay defense just shut down the Seattle offense. Green Bay still in contention for the NFC North title with Minnesota and Detroit. Probably going to be the third team in that division to go to the playoffs with Minnesota and Detroit. Good stuff. Good win over the weekend, especially up there in the Northwest where Seattle can be a very, very strong home field team. But Green Bay just handled business and handled basically without breaking a sweat. Big win for Green Bay. They're more likely going to the playoffs. And speaking of the other teams in NFC, Washington got their 9th win. Looks like they may be headed to the playoffs. Held off a late surge by the Saints. Spencer Rattler turned it on late, but the miscommunication of the 2-point conversion. Solid game though for Jaden Daniels. The 2 touchdown passes to McLaurin. I said this again. How many guys really thought that Washington was going to win 9 games this season? Thought so. Because I said all along, when they drafted Jaden Daniels, they was going to start to trend upward and basically get rid of the residue that was left during the Daniel Snyder era. And we should know how that was. For them to be in the playoffs is a job well done for the stand-up rookie quarterback, Jaden Daniels, who I think is going to win the Rookie of the Year. They probably get another win. They get 10 wins, they'll probably seal it. Washington has something good going right now. A lot of people are nitpicking who they beat, who they didn't beat. Thing is, right now, they're 9-5, and nobody thought they would actually be at this point. They made the smart choice drafting Jaden Daniels. They got Brian Robinson Jr. back. No Austin Eckler yesterday, but they're going to be in the playoffs. They're not going to catch Philly for the division title. You can forget that. But a real feel-good story here. Washington turning it around after years of embarrassment and dreadfulness that was the Dan Snyder era. They're going to the playoffs. And speaking of the division standings, of course, the one Thursday night was the Rams over the 49ers, and a game that basically was beyond unwatchable. But the story here was, of course, De'Vondre Campbell refusing to go in. He refused to go in after Kyle Shanahan told him to go in to replace Dan Greenlaw. And basically, he just refused and left. Well, first of all, you're not going to. He's not. Kyle Shanahan told him basically straight up, if Dan Greenlaw comes back, that's his position. You guys don't know, Dan Greenlaw was the one who was getting ready to trot on the field in Super Bowl 57. 2 steps in, he blows his Achilles. He was done and went out indefinitely. He comes back. Basically, Campbell's had his spot for the longest time. Shanahan basically told him so he can sit Greenlaw for a couple plays, and he refused. Need I remind you that this is the same team that had Tre'Davious Ward and Trent Williams on the sidelines because they had, they lost, they had the passings of their own children. And Tre'Davious Ward was on the field playing through one of the most terrible scenarios you could go through in any walk of life, which is playing with a heavy, heavy heart because you had to bury your own child. And Tre'Davious Ward just let De'Vondre Campbell have it. It's in there. The audio is on there. It's on the X platform, the Facebook platform, all these platforms. You can see it. Basically, just calling him a sissy, and you can just get off the team. It's uncalled for. We consider the fact that Tre'Davious Ward is playing through the heavy heart that he's playing with. And nobody spoke more perfectly because of what he went through than Tre'Davious Ward. Perfectly said true words. Of course, it's now revealed that the 49ers are going to suspend him for the end of the season without pay, so he can't go to another team, which, you play stupid games, you win stupid prizes. That's what happened to De'Vondre Campbell. He got exactly what he deserved. Basically, this is just basically blunt insubordination, what he basically did. And at the end of the day, he got what he deserved. The 49ers handled it perfectly. Even the general manager, John Lynch, rumor-wise, supposedly came down and made a statement that he confronted him. I guess there are a couple guys after the game still was talking about it and basically saying, you don't want to be in our team. Have a seat. We have nothing to do with you. It reminds me of what took place a few years ago in Buffalo with Vontae Davis when he just walked out at halftime. Not quite that, but pretty darn close. But we consider the hell and high water this team went through with all the injuries and all the off the field personal life tragedies that took place, especially with Javius Ward and Trent Williams. This was a blatant act of cowardice by De'Vondre Campbell. He got exactly what he deserved. He doesn't deserve to be on another team, honestly. And quite frankly, I'd be surprised if he's on an NFL roster because I don't know how this would go through any locker room simply because this sort of thing that is out in the open now, the way it is, everyone's going to see it. Everyone's going to know it. And basically, anyone who wants to try to bring this sort of thing on their roster is basically asking for toxicity because this is a bad look for him at the end of the day. I'd be surprised if he's on an NFL roster next season. But kudos for the 49ers for doing this. Now I turn a bit to the playoff picture a little bit. AFC, Kansas is going to get the 1 seed. Buffalo likely has a 2 seed locked up. They basically won their division. Question is who wins the AFC North. More likely it's going to come down to the game this Saturday between Baltimore and Pittsburgh. Of course, we know Pittsburgh's had Baltimore's number in recent years, but it depends on the health of George Pickens because one thing I noticed in the game against Philly, offense didn't look as great without him. They need Pickens to help out that offense a little bit because there were throws Russell Wilson missed. But they're saying like he's on a grade 2 hamstring, so who knows? I wouldn't be surprised if he is back for this game. I think they need him for this more than the Philly game, actually, because it's for conference standings, division standings, potentially for the division right here. Of course, Baltimore is challenging them. Right now, they're the 5th seed, having to go to Houston. More likely, whoever's in second place of the Baltimore, Pittsburgh, AFC North standings will probably go to Houston as the 5 seed because Houston's going to be the 4. Question will be who's going to finish 6 or 7 between the Chargers and the Broncos. Going to be a big tilt coming up this Thursday. Right now, Denver's playing pretty darn solid ball, and the Chargers just got humiliated by Tampa on their home field. We'll see where that one goes. Still think it's going to be those 2 teams. Question's going to be who's 6 and who's 7. Now, the NFC, right now, Detroit's clinging to the number 1 seed in a virtual tie with Philly. Don't know how the tiebreakers work. I think for now, Detroit has it. But the decimation of the injuries of Detroit, you think at one point it's going to start to take its toll. It started to show last couple weeks here when teams started to score on them, especially Buffalo, who did anything and everything they wanted to. And of course, the third seed is probably more likely going to be either the NFC West winner or the NFC South winner. The division leaders there right now are respectively the Rams and the Buccaneers. Rams playing some solid ball. I mean, they got that ugly win in San Francisco Thursday, but there's still Seattle and Arizona in that division. I would be quick to write them off. But basically, those 2 divisions with the West and the South, whoever wins those divisions is probably going to be headed to the playoffs because they're not sending any more teams in those divisions simply because the NFC North is going to send Detroit, Minnesota, and Green Bay pretty much. Those 3 teams are going. Philly going to wrap up the NFC East soon. They're probably going to go. Washington more likely gets to 10 wins. They're going to go. So that's basically your NFC picture. Of course, seedings is going to be what's going to be the issue here taken forward. And of course, matchups, bye weeks, et cetera, et cetera. It'll be ventured once the playoffs officially start and we know what the matchups are. So that takes care of my football talk. Of course, for my Ohio State followers this week, before I go into boxing, college football week this week, Tennessee and Ohio State. Got followers of both teams. Watching you guys just go at it on this Twitter wars. So I'm just going to sit back and laugh. All I'm going to say is may the best team win. I don't have a dog in this fight. Now to what took place Saturday night south of the border. This was Jaime Munguia. I'm going to try to pull this guy's name up. I can't even pronounce it here correctly. Being upset over the weekend with a perfectly placed right cross, and basically he was down on the canvas, flat on his back, and he was gone. Let's see, I'm going to pull the guy's up name here. Losing to a fighter named Bruno Surace. Was knocked out in the 5th round, and one of the most brutally placed punches right on the sweet spot. And that was all she wrote for Jaime Munguia. If you guys don't know, Jaime Munguia just came off the fight against Canelo Alvarez where, he was taking the distance. He gave a solid performance. Or I would say solid, maybe a good performance, but that's it. Was actually headed for a title eliminator with Christian and Billy if had he succeeded with this. But we know what happened. Bad mistake, dropped the hands, perfectly timed right cross, right on the point of the chin. Munguia is down. A lot of people are complaining about a fast count. It is no fast count. Please shut up. But promise he was up. He was wobbly. There was no complaints from him or his team about the stoppage. Basically, well stopped because he was hurt. When he got up, if unless you're Stevie Wonder, you could see that he was hurt. We have a lot of idiots, especially the Mexican boxing community, who have a problem with it, and you guys need to shut up. He was hit point on the chin, down, out for the count. Technically, I mean, when he was up, he wobbled all over the place. So I think it's only like his 5th or 6th career knockout or something like that. So not necessarily the biggest puncher out of all of them, but that's what happens. We find the sweet spot on a fighter, perfectly timed, perfectly placed. That's what happens. That's what happened here. I mean, Pernell Whitaker did the same thing himself. I mean, he only had 17 career knockouts, but the ones he got were highlight reel style, just like that. Kudos to Bruno Surace on an enormous win. I mean, probably the upset of 2024 in the boxing world. And of course, this week is the big week for all of us in the fight community. It is the rematch between Oleksandr Usyk and Tyson Fury. Now we have conspiracy theorists who are idiots thinking, and I say thinking respectfully, that Tyson Fury is going to get a decision because apparently there's a three-way FaceTime with him, Turk Sheik and Usyk, saying I'd like to have a third fight if it's possible. Well, first, I want to get this out of the way. Tyson Fury is not beating Oleksandr Usyk. I don't care what anybody says. If you legit think Tyson Fury is going to win this fight, go to a hospital and get checked with CTE, get the results, send them to me, and then I'll analyze your brain. Second of all, he just said he basically did what he's supposed to do. I mean, that's what guys like Turk Sheik supposed to do. Get the guys together, have a nice little conversation. Let's talk about the fight, and let's see what happens. A lot of people are drawing some weird conclusions with this. Of course, tomorrow I'm going to be on a show with a couple of people from the opposite of the Atlantic to discuss this. I will discuss it more. But there's a lot of weird conclusions from this three-way FaceTime, which I think it was just much ado about nothing. Just three guys are talking about the fight. Okay, let's see what's going to happen. Of course, Fury's saying he's going to send Usyk into retirement, which is not going to happen. Usyk basically said, just simply laughed at the whole thing because I said all along, Tyson Fury likes to trash talk and play mind games. You're not going to do that with Oleksandr Usyk. He's the only one that could probably match him in that regard and won't be, broken down like Deontay Wilder was in their 3-fight series. So I'm going to touch on this more this week. I have a couple shows this week I'm going to be on to talk about Fury Usyk. But right now, I'm making a big hubbub over what took place in that three-way FaceTime with Sheik, Fury, and Usyk. Much ado about nothing. Now, of course, this is the real heavyweight championship, not the fake heavyweight championship Daniel Dubois has, because it is a fake heavyweight championship. Largely because Daniel Dubois decided, Oleksandr Usyk did the smart thing to take the belt and said, go stick it, because he already beat Daniel Dubois once, and Daniel Dubois had no business being a mandatory to Oleksandr Usyk. So Oleksandr Usyk decided to take that, say, you can have the fake belt, Daniel Dubois, and you can be the fake heavyweight champion, because anybody in this community knows Oleksandr Usyk is the legit champion. I say that as a segue because a famous one of these took place 32 years ago in London. The synopsis: it was a 4-way heavyweight tournament. Lennox Lewis, Razor Ruddock, Evander Holyfield, and Riddick Bowe. Lewis and Ruddock becomes a number 1 contender across the board. Holyfield, Bowe, whoever wins was the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. Lewis demolishes Ruddock in 2 rounds in Earl's Court in London. At the Thomas and Mack Center in Vegas, Riddick Bowe beats Evander Holyfield to win the championship. So Lewis is the mandatory, Bowe's a champ. Riddick Bowe taunts Lennox Lewis at ringside. Lennox Lewis tells him to his face, bring it on, I'm going to knock you out when we fight. So Riddick Bowe and his manager, Rock Newman, who are all about the theatrics, not boxing, the theatrics, took a personal flight to London. and basically announced with a garbage can with that belt in his hand that he's not gonna fulfill the mandatory. He's gonna take that belt and just throw it in the garbage can. And basically, he's going to call Lennox Lewis a garbage. He said Lennox Lewis can now be a garbage picker to pick that belt up out of the garbage can, simply because he did not want to oblige with the so-called mandatory. A lot of ways I can go with this, but here's the big picture. He never fought Lennox Lewis after that. Had he gone on ahead and fought Lennox Lewis, maybe this thing doesn't look as bad on him as it does. But boy, it looks worse and worse and worse every time you think about it. Let's start with this. He ducked Lennox Lewis to fight the corpse of a 38-year-old Michael Dokes who had no business fighting for any heavyweight championship. After that, he fights the corpse of Jesse Ferguson, who had no business fighting for any heavyweight championship of the world. You know, let me back up here. Those are basically two homecoming fights for Riddick Bowe. New York, where he currently resides. I guess he has connections in Maryland, where the Ferguson fight took place. We use the word duck all over the place too loosely. Don't come to me with the word duck until you see this, because this was probably the biggest duck maybe ever. Certainly for this time, in this era, maybe the biggest. And some might come close, but not Trump's this. He basically threw the belt in the garbage can to say, I won't fight Lennox Lewis. Turned out he threw the belt in the garbage can to never fight Lennox Lewis. And of course, decades later, he was confronted by Evander Holyfield. You know, they became friends after their great trilogy. Holyfield said to his face, "You should have stepped up and fought Lennox Lewis," to Riddick Bowe's face. We talk about fights that never been made that should have been made. This one is probably number one on everybody's list. This fight should have been made. Now, let me remind you something else that happened. Back in 1988 at the Olympics in Seoul, South Korea, these two fought for the gold medal, and Lennox Lewis dog walked Riddick Bowe in 2 rounds. I mean, dog walked him. I mean, Riddick Bowe basically was resorting to dirty tactics in the first, and then the second round, Lennox Lewis says, "Screw it, I'm going to beat his ass," and that's what he did. Fight was essentially over. And Lewis won the gold, Bowe won the silver. Feeling is that still resonated in Riddick Bowe's head simply because, you know, Lennox Lewis has basically owned him every single which way possible and imaginable on that particular day. And when he got to become Riddick Bowe's mandatory, same thing there. It bothered Riddick Bowe. They had to fight him, so that's why he threw the belt in the garbage can. The fact they had to fly to London to do this is something that's I don't get. I mean, you could sort of say I should have taken the fight instead of having to cough up money to go to London, buy a garbage can so you can put a belt in it and just take it away. Now, of course, there's the other aspect is because the governing bodies are some of the most corrupt things we've had in our sport. That's something different, but I'm not going to divulge into that. But 32 years ago today, maybe the most infamous thing to happen to Riddick Bowe was when the belt threw in the garbage can, and he called Lennox Lewis a garbage picker. Of course, Lennox Lewis countered by calling him Chicken Bowe, which at the end of the day, that's what he was, because he didn't want any parts of Lennox Lewis, stemming back to what Lewis did to Bowe in the Olympics, 5 years before that. So, infamous day, and it is what it is. Lewis, of course, becomes a top 5 all-time great heavyweight. Riddick Bowe, basically, after he beat Evander Holyfield, no longer cared because the guy wanted to live up and down, couldn't keep him out of the kitchen, didn't want to train. That's probably why he threw the belt in the garbage can to duck Lennox Lewis. And now the historical part of this, my favorite part, because I like to educate these fight fans when it comes to the belts. This took place over 60 years ago today. This was the Madison Square Garden in New York City. This was the mecca of boxing for decades and decades, for the longest time. This was Jose Torres defending his undisputed light heavyweight championship against Dick Tiger. Dick Tiger, coming off the tough loss to Emil Griffith, made his light heavyweight debut. Was supposed to be food for Jose Torres, a very slick, tough fighter from New York with a Puerto Rican descent. This fight basically was supposed to be a stepping stone for Torres, but Dick Tiger came up with other ideas. Tiger was supposed to 37 on the downside of his career. This fight, I remind you again, the one belt era, not these governing bodies you guys like to bitch about in the boxing community because you have nothing better to talk about. One belt, Winner takes all. Jose Torres, Dick Tiger for the light heavyweight championship of the world. Dick Tiger was a two-time middleweight champion, got incredible wins all over the place, but was on the wrong side of his career after losing convincingly to Emil Griffith. Moved up to light heavyweight, and basically the fight started out a give and take back and forth, but Torres looking like he had the early success, took control of the fight early, and from the sixth round on, Dick Tiger stepped up the aggression, and basically as the fight wore on, he started to win the home crowd of Jose Torres, who was cheering Tiger on now to step up the pressure. Had his moments, actually started to wear Torres down and have him hurt at times throughout the second half of this fight. And when he stepped it up and the punch flame stepped up, Jose Torres didn't have any answers for him. And Dick Tiger, as starting to gain confidence from about the seventh round on, he really gained confidence and he was starting to impose his will on Torres. And Torres at that point started to have no answers. And as the decision was announced, Dick Tiger got probably the biggest win of his Hall of Fame all-time great career when he shocked Jose Torres to win the light heavyweight championship of the world. Remind you, he was a 3-1 underdog, and back in the 50s and 60s, if you were a 3-1 underdog and winning a fight, that was a giant upset. Those 3-1 odds were basically like mismatches back in those days. I mean, not like we see today where the Mike Tyson busted Douglas 42-1. That's a whole different story. But 3-1 back in those days, you were basically, it was like the equivalent of being those days, it was like being the equivalent of a 3-touchdown favorite in an NFL or a college football game. That's how the size of a shocker this was. One judge had 8-6 winning rounds. The other two gave Dick Tiger 10. One gave him 10 rounds. The other one 11 rounds. Again, this was the round system, not the point system, not the half point system, the quarter point system, the I hate the judge system. This was the round system where you win the round, you're credited with winning the round. Because that's what happened with Dick Tiger, Jose Torres. One judge had 8-6 winning rounds. One judge had a 10-4-1. The other one 11-4, and Dick Tiger was the winner. Probably the peak of Dick Tiger's career. Of course, this prompted it to a rematch because Jose Torres felt he was wrong the first time. A much better fight the second time, because Jose Torres actually matched wit for wit with Dick Tiger. Close decision. Many people thought that Torres was, victimized by an egregious decision. Tiger was rewarded the second, which from the footage I saw, I thought it could have gone either way. But it caused a major riot inside the Madison Square Garden in the rematch because chairs and objects were thrown in the ring at the time because they were protesting the decision. Where the Puerto Rican contingent at the time, who were backing Jose Torres, who has a Puerto Rican background, thought Torres should have been given the decision. They pulled a boatload of at least 20 at least 15 beat writers. It was basically 8-7. 8 had Torres, 7 had Tiger. So it wasn't necessarily the robbery you thought it was. But you can call it a bad decision because I think one judge gave Tiger more rounds than he should have gotten credit for. But Dick Tiger was the winner of the rematch. But their first fight that took place, Dick Tiger was became the legit light heavyweight champion of the world in the one belt era. One belt, winner takes all. Not the garbage you guys love in the boxing community because you guys like spewing garbage about governing bodies and putting governing bodies in your posts, governing bodies in your tweets because you guys are just stupid. One belt, winner takes all. That's what this was. Dick Tiger basically got a landmark moment, which basically was on his downturn before he went out because Torres was basically the man of the light heavyweight division at the time. It was basically like a light heavyweight version of what Michael Spinks did to Larry Holmes back then. Because like Spinks, like Holmes, Tiger was on his downturn, but he moved up like Spinks fighting Torres, who was the bad man, undefeated. Torres got basically got outworked in the first fight, and the second fight was a pretty darn good one both ways. But Dick Tiger elevated himself to probably a top 75 all-time great fighter. That's where everybody, the respective pundits, put him at. That's probably where I put him because it's hard to go that deep into boxing history in terms of greatness. a massive record. Made a couple of successful defenses before he met the standout Bob Foster, where he was just posterized by a left hook and lost his title on a fourth round knockout, where the left hook just caught him clean and put him down and out. The only time in Dick Tiger's career he was ever knocked out. Jose Torres, solid light heavyweight, never got to that championship level again, but he did. Was a solid light heavyweight. Actually worked with Mike Tyson for the longest time because they were part of that town of New York. Torres also part of the custom model regime, like a Torres, like a Tyson and Floyd Patterson. But on this day, over 60 years ago, Dick Tiger, basically the landmark moment and the pinnacle of his career, regained glory on his downturn to become the legit undisputed light heavyweight champion of the world. Legit undisputed one belt champion. That's what it was. Not all these governing bodies. You know, I've always said with these sort of things, my favorite part of this is when I see people today, if I read about all of this stuff and I see all this stuff when I study this, whether it be, boxing, the NFL, the NBA, among many others, how people go do all this yada, yada, yada about everything that's wrong, or yada, 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 or whatever they want to talk. I like to put things in perspective because I have to remind myself too what it was then versus what it is now. I mean, complaining about it's not going to get anybody anywhere, isn't it? Especially you guys in the boxing community, in the NFL community, especially in some of these communities. I'm not even going to divulge into it because I'm not using today for it. But I'll tell you this: maybe we need to have a different, broader view of, maybe a greater appreciation for what took place then for any sport, because a path was carved by some of these, if you want to call them founders or trendsetters, whatever word you want to use, to where we're at today. Some of this today wouldn't be if it weren't for some of the guys in the past. And we think about some of these accomplishments that some of these athletes had in the past, because I do this a lot with boxing, as I just did with Dick Tiger, puts a lot of things in perspective. Because sometimes when you try to grow a tree, sometimes a tree sometimes grows a little too big to where you have multiple branches, and now you don't know what the hell you have. That's what happened with the belts in the boxing community. That's what happened with all of these so-called rule changes in other sports like football, basketball. I guess baseball's doing some crazy stuff. I'm not even going to get into it. Maybe time for a greater appreciation of what the past was, and sometimes you might want to embrace it and talk about it to maybe put things in perspective to what we have now versus what there was then. Because if it's the old adage, if what happened then happens now, or what we know now, if it had happened then, things would change. I could say that about 15 to 20 million times, but as we all know, history is what it is. So that takes take care of all of that. The two games, of course, before I wrap up the two games tonight, I have Minnesota and the Raiders winning. Anything else before I wrap it up? Just wanted to say, as I close this out for the day, one thing I like to talk about, because I always end my show with this. I see a lot of you guys out here in all these communities talking about, self-care or helping others. That's great. But always, always, always make self-care a priority. I had to learn that myself. You don't take care of yourself first. What good are you to help the others? Because I've learned this throughout the years. It cost me a lot, and I mean it cost me a lot. But I gained a lot of it back in the end. You always got to take care of yourselves first, because what good are you to anybody else if you don't help yourself? I mean, it's one thing to ask for help, but it's another thing to ask to be enabled. It's got a lot in this world these days. Interesting times. And that will wrap up this edition of Sirhan on X. Tomorrow I have quite a few shows I will be on. Of course, this will be on here tomorrow evening, as well. I will be on a show with a couple cross-Atlantic people talking about the Usyk-Fury rematch. Got a spaces I'm going to be joining to talk some NFL. I'll be all over the place tomorrow. Just grab yourself a cold one, have a seat, and listen in. Because just relax. Because that's what I do when I'm on this. So I don't drink beer. I just limit myself to Gatorades and water, because that's my thing. I don't do alcohol. Sorry, I don't do alcohol if you guys can throw those kind of parties. I have to respectfully decline. But until then, hope you guys have yourselves a wonderful 16th of December 2024. Enjoy the rest of the day. Good night. Take care, and God bless.